presentation. I've titled this presentation "Thriving in Chaos," and the reason for that is that and basically I'm basing this entire presentation on the work of Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Is an author of the two books which you see on the screen, The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. So I will try
Lara,
and
sorry, please can you put it on slideshow?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. If I put it on slideshow, okay, hold on. Is it showing as a slideshow now?
No.
So that's exactly what I meant. I was having challenges. It's still so
Okay.
right now. It's on a slideshow on my screen. So I don't know why it's no longer. It's not appearing as a slideshow. Okay, resume slideshow. Is it
I
showing
guess
as?
we'll just
Is it
go
showing
on.
as? Is it showing as a slideshow now?
I
No,
think it's
it's
on
not.
slideshow.
Okay, hold on.
Okay. But let's go ahead.
Okay,
Let's go ahead. Thank you.
can you still see my screen now, or I need to reshare?
No, we can't say it.
Okay, I apologize for the challenge. I don't know why it's no longer. It's not showing as a slideshow,
Mm.
but I've even when I because well maybe it's because I have three screens open. I apologize for that. Um, So basically, I've based this work on the work of on the writings of someone who has been described particularly as a volatility expert. He's called Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and he authored the book The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile: Things That Came from Disorder. And what I found particularly interesting was that much of what I read, I could see it in day-to-day lives. They are practical, recognizable items. And then the most important concept here is that human beings are notoriously um, arrogant about their ability to predict the future. And so basically, as I proceed, the things will make more sense here. So the grand philosophy here is that you're either fragile in the way you've positioned yourself, in the way you think, or you're robust, or you're anti-fragile. And as I proceed, I think it will make more sense what fragility means and anti-fragile means. So I'll give you an example, a very simple example, which he presented in his book. What he described as the turkey problem or the turkey surprise. And so, for instance, if someone owns a poultry where they raise turkeys or they raise chickens, where they whatever animal, for instance, and then they have a specific door which you open every day, and when you open that door, you bring food to the turkey. What happens is that whenever that door opens, the turkey goes there expecting food, and it may happen for a period of 1,000 days, where the turkey, without fail, recognizes that there will always be food whenever that door opens. And then on the 1,001 day, or the day after 1,000 days, the door opens, and instead of the turkey to see food, the turkey sees a knife, which is taken to the turkey's neck, and the turkey's head is cut off, and the turkey is used for food. And that describes much of the human condition and the human existence. Because oftentimes when we are used to we like routine and we like predictability, and what we do is we find ourselves building patterns based on our current realities, and then we conclude that, or we want to believe that things will always be that way. But then suddenly a shock arrives, and for many people, they're unprepared for the shock. And then that's pretty much the concept of fragility. Because we are used to predictability, we become fragile, we become open to ruin risk, basically risks that could ruin us because we're unprepared for it. And then that's sort of what I'll bring here. So I said earlier, we have three states of existence where you're either fragile, robust, or anti-fragile. And in this book, he describes it from a professional sense, where he describes white collar workers or conventional employees as people who are fragile because they are used to receiving a salary, for instance, where, and obviously this conversation is not, I'm not anti-employment, I'm just trying to buttress the point, where you've worked for a corporation for 10 years, 15 years, or 5 years, 1 year, whatever, and then every month you receive a salary on a specific date, and you plan your life and base your life exactly on that predictable outcome. And then what happens is, at the presence of one financial crisis, one shock, that entire system crumbles. That entire belief system crumbles because you might if the person loses their job, or if, for instance, they have to take a pay cut, it becomes problematic. So in that case, such a person is fragile. And then the example he gave about being robust is people like business owners who are also vulnerable to market pressures and things like that, but they are more robust in the sense that they are used to the ups and downs. Because as a business owner, you tend to see the ups and downs, and then you develop some sort of a shock absorber, so to speak. Whereas those who are anti-fragile are those who can even gain from the disorder because they've built themselves in such a manner that they expect volatility and unpredictability, and they expect chaos, so to speak. So they've built themselves over time such that they are even able to exploit and benefit from volatile systems or volatile things. So that's the three states of existence. So the concept here is that, so take for instance, a glass cup is fragile. um a metal object might be robust, whereby if you introduce heat it will expand or it will contract, as the case may be. And whereas the human muscle, for instance, if you train it and train it, the more you train it, at the first time you introduce a weight, for instance, it feels pain. If you've ever run, for instance, if you only ever run 500 meters, you would imagine that you cannot run more than 500 meters until the day you run 600, and then the day you run 700. You introduce yourself to newer levels of pain and consciousness such that you become stronger. So that's the concept here about the three states of existence. And the main problem, one of the main problems with fragility is that, or predictability, conventional, is that it gives us a false sense of stability. So, and the examples I have here on the screen are a case of two communities where one has faced flooding before. In the, let's say the community is 200 years old, and in the 200-year history of the community, they faced flooding several times. So what you see is that whenever they're building new structures in that community, they build structures with higher DPC, they have drainage planning, they are prepared, so to speak, because they've experienced it before. They know that flood is something that can happen. Whereas if you go to another community where they've never experienced flooding and they've lived in bliss as it relates to the weather and water, and then suddenly a flood comes, what happens is that because they have never been prepared for floods, maybe none of them have ever learned to swim because they've never expected floods. What happens is that in such a community, you will record higher loss of lives than the community that has experienced periodic incremental floods over their 200-year history. And this concept, so the concept here, or the thinking here, is that for us human beings, um, leaders, town planners, whatever the case may be, there is a concept called homesis, where like you find in the when we think about vaccinations, for instance, the way you get vaccinated for an illness is when they introduce a little bit of that in illness into your system, and then your body then creates, because your body has seen like a threat, the body builds resistance for that specific illness. In fact, there are people who have gradually introduced poison to their systems over and over again, so they've developed certain resistance to certain poisons. So in that case, something that should be harmful ultimately becomes beneficial to them in the face of danger associated with, for instance, the poison. So that's the example. So the lesson here is not that you want floods, is that you simply cannot live a life where, because you've never experienced floods, you don't think floods can ever happen. So this is just one example. And then this brings us nicely into the concept of black swans, which is, I think, what we base. So let me just put it in perspective. The idea of the word black swans, or the phrase black swans, it originates from the fact that before Australia was discovered, before explorers arrived at Australia for the first time, it was believed that all swans were white. And it was in the history books that swans were white until explorers arrived in Australia and saw the first black swan. And it was like a huge shock, because it meant that the entire belief system around birds and swans, for instance, was flawed in its entirety because of limited exposure, limited experience. Their entire worldview was based on one environment, and in the moment they were introduced to another environment, they recorded a black swan. So, but here, black swan refers to unpredictable events that are beyond what is normally expected. So, for instance, Japan experiences earthquakes from time to time, and I think, in Venezuela recently there was an earthquake in Venezuela. But Nigeria does not experience earthquakes. So what it means is that we have no earthquake planning. This is just an example. And if ever there was to be an earthquake, we would be vastly unprepared. That would be a black swan event. And so in other circumstances, for instance, you have like for instance, COVID-19 was a black swan event. Many people were didn't see it coming. It was like a huge shock. And then you have like the stock market collapse or of 2008 and all those other things. I think that people pretty much didn't see coming, and then the effects were catastrophic, such that they changed how we view the world entirely. Now, from an opportunity perspective, for instance, at the advent of the internet, there were a lot of people who didn't believe that the internet would not amount to anything. Whereas, as we can see today, the rest of the world has shifted towards using the internet for everything. So that's an example. When the internet came to fruition, it was like a black swan event. It changed. It's the same thing with like when electricity was first introduced into the world on commercial levels. It changed everything. The same thing as well with when cars and aeroplanes were built. These were black swan events that changed the scope of the world in its entirety. So that's an example of a positive black swan event. And then, so within the domain of when we have a conversation about black swans, we have things. So we have things that exist in the Medio-Christian, right? So, for instance, you know that, and then things that exist in the Medio-Christian are things that don't really have catastrophic effects, even when they have outliers. So, for instance, if you have that average height of people in the world are, let's say, 5 feet, and you have one person whose height is 7 feet, it's an outlier. But because one person's height doesn't particularly have a catastrophic effect on the rest of the world, it falls under the domain of Mediocristan. Whereas Extremistan is where we see the huge effects of black swans. So, for instance, like I think the examples I gave, financial market crashes, viral outbreaks, or when the currency suddenly crashes and then there's huge inflation in an economy. Those are examples of things like black swan effects, or war, for instance, wars that are unpredictable. Wars, maybe two countries have a conflict and you imagine that it's just going to end in diplomacy. And then it eventually leads to a war that neighboring countries are not prepared for. So that's an example of a black swan event. And then there are certain types of professions that also exist under the extremist stand, for instance, whereby somebody sells a book, and then instead of with the expectation that the book was going to sell to 1,000 people, but then eventually the book sells to 10 million people. That's like an extremist stand. It's a black swan event to that person. So like I said, the expectations are they are outside ordinary expectations. They have large impact, and somehow, notoriously, human beings try to rationalize it after it has happened. We try to imagine that, oh, I thought I saw this coming, or I thought it was supposed to be like this. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. Like I said, we are notoriously, as human beings, we are notorious for believing that we can predict outcomes, and that's sort of why that Turkey example is very important. Now, when we take it into careers, for instance, we become fragile when we, for instance, build our life around one employer, or we have just one skill and just one client or one connection, one plan. And I'll give you an example. There was a time in this world when being a typist with a typewriter was a well paid job, or what I would say averagely paid job, a good job that could sustain you for a period of time. And if someone is a typist and they have not developed any additional skills, at the introduction of the PC, the personal computer, when things began to change and people began to do things for themselves and no longer require the services of typists to that extent, someone who's a typist who had not developed additional skills becomes obsolete in the marketplace, right? So they are fragile in that context. It's a trap. So in the same way, someone who has just one client, you're a business person, you have just one client, and if your client goes bankrupt, you fall flat on the floor. So these are examples. If you have one plan, one so we talk about floods, for instance. If your only plan is that, oh, when if the floods come, we're going to move and live on our boats. What happens if your boats fails or your boats has a hole, for instance? It means you are fragile. You're vulnerable to volatility. You're highly vulnerable to volatility. So that's an example. So it creates dependency without buffers. And from an income perspective, I think I gave the example of someone who's a salary professional, a business owner, and a skilled practitioner. And then, so take for instance an artisan who is a shoemaker. Who so here, this one is one of the examples I really like when you consider the salaried professional, the business owner, and a skilled practitioner. A skilled practitioner in this side could be an artisan, someone who's so there's an argument that a taxi driver is more anti-fragile than someone in a well-paid blue white collar job, because a taxi driver is used to periods where there's no business, and is used to periods where sometimes business comes. So as a consequence, they expect that there's a time when there will be no business. So they plan accordingly. And it also means that they can move from one city to another city and start a taxi business in a day, just in one day. Right. Whereas someone who is a salaried professional, if they lose their job, they have to wait for periods when they advertise jobs, and they will continue to apply and apply and apply until an employer takes a chance on them. Or except they have exceptional skills. But even when they have exceptional skills, they are at the mercy of whoever the recruiter is. So that's an example. Whereas somebody who's a plumber who doesn't speak English, for instance, can move from Russia, or can move from Nigeria to Russia, or from Nigeria to China. And then, because they have skills, because they have a skill, plumbing is plumbing, pipes are pipes wherever you go. What happens is that ultimately they are able to move into that new environment and quickly begin to fend for themselves economically. Such professions demonstrate anti-fragility. Whereas some other professions, which there are professions that can be disrupted by the introduction of one new software. One new software comes into the marketplace, and accountants, for instance, may be out of a job. So these are examples of fragility versus anti-fragility, and maybe even robust. So Nicholas Nassim Taleb says, from a point of view of building a life, he employs something called the barbell strategy, where there are things where there are things. So, like if you consider a barbell in the gym, where you have weights on one side and weights on the other side, you don't nothing is in the middle. And his philosophy is that you avoid the middle. The safe base is where you work on things like your health, you build a reputation, you develop your core skill. And an emphasis on core skill. Core skill here implies that you could have additional skills, not just one, but you have a core skill where your core livelihood comes from. And then you have savings, for instance, you have health. But he also insists that you also, in addition to to having a safe base, you take small upsize bets. For instance, you begin to work on things like side projects. Maybe you take out some money to go and learn a new skill. For instance, you begin to apply yourselves into other domains. You build a portfolio of skills. You start to pick up new tools. You start to build new networks on the other side of things. Maybe you begin to do a lot of investment in an area that is upcoming. Basically, there are risks you could lose, but then what you learn from that experience is that losing is normal in some cases. And at the same time, the way black swan events are is that you could make a mistake and benefit from that mistake. You could accidentally invest in something, and then that something becomes the next big thing. And then when they ask you, and if you speak to many people, a lot of them tell you that in hindsight they had no idea that what they were doing would be so big. So that's an example, and of how the barbell strategy works in real life. So he Nassim Taleb distinguished between useful failure versus ruin risk. In the absence of what I would call buffers, and in the absence of a thick skin, so to speak, or in the absence of if you've lived in a bubble for a long time, what happens is that at the introduction of one big risk, or you make one irreversible bet, you lose completely. Whereas there's things like that are useful failures. So if you apply for a job and you get rejected, for instance, you are able to learn, you get feedback from that experience. You learn that maybe your speaking is not could be improved, or your CV is not as strong as you thought it was. It gives you immediate feedback. Um, you an attempt at going public with something, for instance, that, like basically things that allow you to go into the marketplace and test yourself, where you can fail or you can succeed, are useful failures. Where you feel they are useful for you because you get feedback. Whereas if you're a big corporation that has never faced a scandal, and you have no, for instance, PR team, whenever there's a scandal, you stand the risk of falling completely due to things like reputational collapse. So these are examples of ruin risk versus useful failures. And the example I gave with floods, if a community has been thriving and has been peaceful, has ever experienced floods, and they experience flood one day, what happens is that there's almost an entire collapse because they were not prepared for it at all. Whereas the community that has experienced periodic floods, where the first flood got to the knee, will be 2 inches or 3 inches, the next flood is 10 inches. All those things come together to create, to be described as useful failure. Now, um, this is one of the other parts that I really like. Now, there is an argument when we begin to talk about fragility and volatility. There's an argument that in the corporate world, there are two types of professionals. There are professionals who may be classed as what they call a hedgehog, and I think I have it on the next slide. A hedgehog is someone who knows one thing and they know it deeply, and they base their entire worldview on that one thing. So from that perspective, what we're referring to is someone who, let's say, a chemist, who all they know is chemistry, for instance, and then they've spent 10 years or 20 years of their life building that skill, versus someone else who has range. What it means is that this person has sampled multiple professions. For instance, he has been a chemist today, um, and then he has gone out to be a footballer. For instance, I know it sounds outrageous when hearing that someone jumps from chemistry to football, but as an example, he has sampled so many different professions, maybe tangential professions, maybe professions still within the same domain. So, for instance, someone who's in construction may have been a plumber, and then he had gone on to become an iron bender, and then he had gone on to become got trained eventually to become a quantity surveyor or whatever. They've dabbled in multiple different professions, maybe even still within the same domain, and eventually they find the one that fits them better. Now, both systems work, but the argument here is that for too long we have promoted the conversation of a specialist, someone who specializes and specializes early enough in their life, and then they are opposing points of view, and then we have so many examples. And then the argument for early specialization, for instance, preaches that if you study something for practice something for 10,000 hours, you become a master of your craft. And then usually to achieve 10,000 hours of practice implies that you would have done this for at least 10 years, so to speak, or 9.5 years. And then you have so many examples. You have people like Tiger Woods, you have Bill Joy, Bill Gates, who, if you listen to their story, I think the concept was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers. And it refers to research carried out by someone named Erickson in 1993, where he studied violinists that did very well in the world over time. And he found that those who went on to become teachers, or those who went on to become world-class performers, were those who went on to become world-class performers are those who had practiced for like 10 years plus, and they spent a lot of hours on their practice. Um, so the argument, or the what they proposed, or what Malcolm Gladwell and Erickson proposed, was that for you to become successful, and this is the key caveat there, for you to become successful, you have to spend time doing one thing over and over and over again. And but someone named David Epstein, for instance, wrote another book called Range, where he argued that actually, while some people who specialize early and um, chase one thing for a long time could be successful, there are so many other examples of people who sampled so much. So, take for instance people like Roger Federer, the famous tennis player, or Serena Williams, and even oh, I'm missing this guy's name. But basically, there are a lot of people who fall into this domain where they sampled so many different things. Vincent van Gogh, for instance, the famous painter, he tried his hand at so many things before eventually finding something that matched him. So there's something called match quality, where, so for instance, someone who wants to be a swimmer, for instance, but he's not very tall, may not go on to become an Olympic gold medalist. So there's the concept of match quality. But then mostly, um, you find that some people specialize early before they even know themselves. And then 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line, they no longer like what they're doing, and they have nothing else to do because they've not developed any additional skill. Whereas those who sample so much in their life eventually find something that they can do forever. But then they have the benefit of multiple domain experience. So now, what it means is that the person who has one skill and has only done one thing is likely to be fragile, whereas the person that has range is likely to be anti-fragile, right? So and then the other important thing to note here is that those who particularly thrive with single specialties are those who operate in domains or what we categorize as kind environments. Kind environments are environments where the rules are clear. You get immediate feedback. Um, Past patterns can predict future, and one size fits all. And you have things like sports. You know the rules of football. You know the when there's an offside, so it's clear. You know there are rules to the game, so you can master that game and not face any ex- take for instance today's football match between England and Norway. There are complaints about the fact that the temperature could be as high as 41 degrees, and they are worried for the players because many of them have never practiced football in that high temperature. Now, why is this important? This is important because normally the rules are clear, and if you follow the rules, better players will win, the team with the better players will win. But now, with the introduction of something that falls outside the domain, outside the rules, it becomes difficult. That's where kind environments don't prepare you for volatility. We also have things like chess or lab settings. If you go to a lab and if you've ever carried out a lab research, you hear things like we are controlling for this, we are controlling for that. So it's a sterilized environment. It's not like a real world environment, right? So what you mean is those environments you can practice for 10,000 hours and you can become a master at this, right? And then because the rules don't change. Whereas in wicked environments, range seems to be better. You see that I categorize single specialty as people who are hedgehogs and those who have range as foxes, because they refer to foxes as people who know a lot about so many things, but they're not really master of any one thing. Whereas hedgehogs are people who know one big thing and build their entire worldview on that one thing. So, and then people who are foxes tend to perform better in wicked environments. And wicked environments are environments that have ch- basically the real world is a wicked environment. If you ever make policy, for instance, you find that you make policy and the policy benefits some people and doesn't benefit some people. So it becomes problematic, which means you could create a policy that should yield good results, but end up creating problems for other people. So that's like a wicked environment. You have if you're trying to solve a problem of homelessness, for instance, you might create solutions that might create new problems. So that's how wicked environments work. And you don't even get the feedback immediately. Unlike kind environments, if you kick a ball into the net, you know whether you score or you don't score. But like a wicked environment, if you create a policy, sometimes it's in 20 years' time, you know whether your policy worked or not. Right? Things like dating, for instance, you don't always get the feedback until you're into deep. Stock markets, managing a team, for instance. And so it is propose that when you're dealing with wicked environments, which is pretty much the world, you need to seek diverse perspectives. You need to expect and embrace uncertainty. One of the challenges we have is that too many of us, myself included, like things to be a certain way, right? And then we want certainty all the time. And in the face of uncertainty, many of us are not well prepared for it because we haven't built that anti-fragility concept. And then we also have to recognize limitations and respect the role of luck. That's one of the other things we capture here. But then, as Nicholas Nassim Taleb proposes, luck will almost only find you when you take those small bets where you recognize that well anything can happen, and then you take those small bets, and then in taking those small bets you expose yourself to the potential for failure. So when we also look at it from an institutional perspective, I think I'm going to be rounding up now. I think I just have two more slides. When we look at it from an institutional perspective, systems that are fragile tend to be centralized. Maybe you have one leader, one revenue source, one central authority, one route to opportunity. And if we take the case of the US Iran war, we can see that it doesn't matter how many times the US strikes Iran, because they do not have a central leadership structure in their military. They have a very decentralized military structure. They continue to keep fighting because they have been prepared such that if one unit is disposed of, there's leadership in the other unit to continue the fight. Whereas there's always a saying that cut the head off the snake. In that usually works when you're dealing with fragile systems. But if you're dealing with stronger systems where you have local capability, where everybody is capable, like everyone in the team has capacity, um, we change leaders in some cases frequently, such that we try out new things and we know what works and what doesn't work and what can work and what cannot work. We have distributed authority where you have multiple leadership points. There's no single point of failure. and you have multiple routes to value. You have multiple ways to get to the same thing. So if you think of companies like Samsung has evolved so many times. Um, Look at Zoom. When Zoom is a corporation that became super big at the advent of COVID, they were able to benefit from that volatility. Unilever, Procter and Gamble, Dangote, for instance, these are all corporations that have continued to reinvent themselves. They have continued to, it's sort of like shedding off their skin. They've continued to move from point A to point B. So basically, and then I give two examples with Greek mythology here, where we have Medusa and Hydra. Hydra, Medusa, for instance, is the Greek monster with the head of snakes, where very powerful, very feared. But once you cut off the head, the entity dies. Whereas Hydra refers to a seven-headed snake. Sorry, seven-headed, yes, seven-headed snake, whereby if you cut off one, two grow in the place of the one you cut off. So that's the idea behind systems that are anti-fragile. They actually gain from disorder. They are poised and positioned to withstand and benefit from chaos. They are broader, they are bigger than resilience. So resilience refers to the ability to adapt and recover from chaos, but those are robust systems. Anti-fragile systems are built such that they could even benefit from. So, for instance, it's a community that is flooded, that can withstand flood. When there's a flood in other communities, people move to those communities where they can withstand flood. What it means is that economic opportunity will move down there, as an example. So now, how do we build anti-fragile systems? There's just 7 key steps. Number one, avoid ruin. What it means is introduce little shocks, put yourself out there, take little risks, right? Not catastrophic risks, but take little risks such that you learn quickly, you fail fast and learn fast. You build portable skills, and here I introduce the concept of skill stacking, whereby someone who is someone who is a website developer and only develops websites, or a graphic designer only develops graphics and suddenly has a problem whereby they've lost their job and maybe graphic designer has gone out of fashion. It means they are stuck. But if you have multiple skills, if you skill stack, whereby you're a graphic designer, but you also know how to, you're an excellent graphic designer, but you're a good coder. Maybe you're not an excellent coder, but you're a good coder, and you also have digital marketing skills, for instance. So you could, these are all in the domain of tech. You could build a skill stack whereby you have your core focus, your core skill, but you have a lot of other sub skills around you that make you unique, that make you indispensable. And like I said, create multiple sources of value, take small, intelligent risks, learn from stress. Do not see stress or chaos as a problem. See it as something to learn from. See it as something that provides feedback. And do not worship certainty. Do not be confident that it has always happened this way, so it will always happen this way. And I'm sure most of us here understand loss. That's what happens to some people when they lose someone because they've never really experienced loss. It changes their entire life trajectory. They do not understand that, well, loss is a part of life, and then ultimately become useful. So I'll leave you with these closing thoughts. Do not pray for a life without volatility. Build a life that can learn from volatility. I'll stop here, hoping to take any questions if there are any.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Dara. You've done justice to this, and my notes is just so full. And I'm sure every other person too has taken down one or two things from this, ranging from useful failure versus ruin risk. There's so many new terms that I've got to learn today. But let's go to the chat box. We have some few questions. Okay. Starting, Yaya Usman is asking, talking about thriving in chaos, how do we avoid becoming overwhelmed when facing multiple crises at once?
Uh, I think my response to that is that first things first, you need to recognize that you're not special. And I say this with all humility. One of the problems we have as human beings is that we fail to realize that we're almost always going to be facing problems. The problem, as I understand it, is that we do not expect problems. We do not want problems. I'm not saying go out and look for problems. I'm saying recognize that you are not special. It's always going to be coming head on to you. And the problem that the next person have will look different from the other person. Now, to answer the question of how do you avoid becoming overwhelmed, there's a strategy that I'd like to apply. There's someone else called Naval Ravikant. You can research him. He's a philosopher and entrepreneur. He talks about, and I know it sounds big-headed to say this. It sounds overly simplistic, but it seems to work for me. He says the example he gave is if you miss a flight, you can stand at the airport and choose to be frustrated, or you could decide to stay at that airport and think of something good from that situation. So, for instance, you can decide that, well, oh, since I've missed the flight, it's an opportunity for me to watch one episode of a program that I have not had time to watch. Or it's an opportunity for me to finish that book that I have missed. You may spend more money trying to reschedule your flight, but it is in the outlook of things that determines whether we benefit from the chaotic situation or whether we suffer from it. You can you can find a way to see everything as an opportunity if you open your mind to it. I think that's the only answer that I can sort of give in this context.
Thank you. So basically, we need to see the opportunity in every disappointment. The next question is, what daily practices would you recommend for someone who wants to become more anti-fragile? Thank you.
My
Talked a
response
bit about that. Yeah.
my response would be very inquisitive. By that I mean just read everything that comes across your desk. Obviously, you can't read everything, but have so much interest in almost anything. Like I would say, avoid the trap of being a single specialty person, and not just in terms of in terms of take for instance, I like to read about multiple different religions just because I want to understand everybody's point of view, right? It doesn't give me the most wisdom, but what it does is that it allows me to understand why people behave the way they behave. It allows me to understand why people see things the way they see the things, and it also allows me to understand that not everything is about me, right? So one of the things about one of the reasons why anti-fragility is important is that when you are hit with disruption, you recognize that. So there are two worldviews. There's either you live in a world of paranoia or a world of pronoia. Paranoia is when you believe the world is out to get you, things are not working out for me. Whereas pronoia is another mindset where you believe that the universe is working in your favor. So one of the things I do is to look at it as there is something to take out of this thing. So I just like to read random stuff whereby because I feel like I don't know where it's going to become valuable to me. And it has sort of helped me build that sort of anti-fragile mentality because there's almost no where I go to where I run into a conversation, where I run into a problem where I won't have an idea or I won't have an idea of who to call, if that makes any sense. Like I network like a mad person. Like I just speak to random people on the road all the time. People's temperament are different, but it seems to work for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good one. So the paranoia in our local parlance is the village people that we always think are
Exactly.
after us.
Exactly.
All right. So our next question is, yeah, today's topic speaks deeply to me. Is anti-fragility a privilege? How can someone with significant financial or family responsibilities afford to take the kinds of risk that anti-fragility seems to encourage?
Now, it's important to recognize that anti-fragility encourages taking small, intelligent risks, not huge risk. It shows you it's like the barbell strategy where you have your safety bets, your things like your savings, you work out to keep your health because if you have no health, every other thing crumbles, right? And then you have on the other side where you take small, intelligent risks. You you develop new skills, and the truth of the matter is, unfortunately, like I said when I started by saying no one is special, we're always going to have these problems, right? It's think of it this way. If you use your entire resources in addressing family problems, right? Extended family problems, for instance, and you do not develop additional skills and you do not further develop yourself, if you do lose your job, those family problems are still going to be there. You're still going to be in a mess. But just that now, there will be no one to save anybody from the family. So it is actually important to recognize that you need to break, from a financial perspective, you need to break your income into bits, whereby you have the safety net, you have the problem solving money, and then you have something where you invest in taking those intelligent risks, at least from a feedback perspective, so you understand what's out there. So you understand what's out there, and then that's why I talked about just reading randomly, reading any random thing. Take for instance, my bread and butter is supply chain, right? But I'm here talking to you about anti-fragility, right? But in my day job, I talk about procurement and circular economy and decarbonization and things like that. But here I am talking to you about anti-fragility and social consciousness. So that's sort of how to think about it. You can't put everything in one pocket, and if you look at it as, well, I can't do this because of these challenges, you probably cannot, because of the outlook.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, how can we build anti-fragility without relying on luck in an extremistan world?
My answer to that would be to, first of all, recognize that. So when you look at things from medio Christian world as well, you recognize that, okay, let me put it this way. So there's, I don't know if you guys know J. Cole. I don't know, you may know him, you don't know him. He's a rapper. And then he talked about how people who used to be very successful wake up one day and they're no longer as successful as they used to be, and they get really upset. And then he mentioned, and then his point is that they don't realize how lucky they have been even in the first place, that not many people, is the idea behind extremistan is that there will always be outliers, but in the extremistan world, the outliers are, the gap is on. Take Elon Musk for instance. His The gap is wide compared to average people who live good lives, right? So my own perspective is that it goes back to recognizing that you have to expect chaos, you have to welcome chaos, but at the same time you have to look around, read random stuff, and identify random opportunities. Take those small intelligent risks such that luck can find you. Like, if you sit in the same comfort zone where you are for 10 years, chances are on the 11th year, it will no longer be a comfort zone, it will be a prison. You sort of need to, I don't know if I'm answering this question the way the person wants me to answer it, but there is always going to be that element of chance and luck where people cannot explain how they got where they are. But the thing is that they position themselves such that when the luck came, they benefited from it. They didn't just wait. They did something. Take Jeff Bezos, for instance. He actually did something. There's an interview where he talked, I can't remember where he was working, where he talks about how he was explaining to his boss the idea he had for a business before he started Amazon. And his boss's response to him was, that sounds like a very good idea, but it sounds like an idea that someone will need to do full time. And he took the risk and left the job. Now, don't get me wrong, Bezos had a safety net. I mean, not we operate from different demographics and different safety nets, but the point is, you actually have to take action. You have to do something for luck to find you. It's that simple. Um, Beyonce, Burna Boy, they didn't get to where they are by imagining it. They got to where they are. There's a saying that the world rewards action, and action builds momentum, right? I have a friend speaking pidgin. I have a friend who says, "It's better to work out for nothing than to sit down for nothing." In other words, it means if you sit at home, nothing will come to you. But if you go out there, there's a chance that you might meet somebody. There's a slim chance that you might meet somebody with an idea that you buy into, or someone who will buy into your idea. So that's how I would answer it.
Thank you very much. So preparation meets opportunity. If you're not prepared, when the opportunity comes, you're likely to still miss out on it because you don't even have the skills or the um, ideas to run with it. So that's basically what it is, especially for those doing white collar jobs. You've been on a job, you're not developing yourself, you just are comfortable with where you are. And with the new world of work that we have now, you need to develop soft skills and other skills that you know are relevant to your profession or your career path that you have chosen, so that when that time comes, you would you'll be ready to take on the position or whatever it is you're being offered. All right. The next question is, what's the difference between thriving in chaos and simply surviving it?
I would say one person is a victim, the other person is an opportunist. And what I mean by that is that one person is the outlook. One person is simply just going through it. Another person, like I said earlier, when you miss the plane, but in missing the plane, you tell yourself, well, what can I get out of this situation? If that makes any sense. There is, and that's what sort of separates serial entrepreneurs, for instance, or problem solvers from people who use the solutions that other problem solvers provide. One person knows how to take a pause and recognize the opportunities that are present to them. And then they know how to network and find other people that recognize the opportunities with them. And then they go it together. Whereas another person just sits there and then just hopes that the next time the train comes, it doesn't hit them. That's
Mm,
the difference.
yeah. Okay, so we have some serious J. Cole fans here. All right. Okay, the next question is, if a career has been stable and predictable for years, could that be a hidden vulnerability? Particularly since people find it difficult to learn new skills deep into their careers.
One of my philosophies is that comfort is your enemy once you're comfortable. Now, people's levels of ambition are different. Some people are okay with a certain lifestyle. I'm not talking about money in this context per se. I'm talking about the fact that comfort can't be your prison, right? And then when we look at what's happening, I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that a lot of the Fortune 500 companies have laid off people in their thousands because of AI. Some of them have gone back to employ the people that they laid off. I think Ford recently re-employed people that they laid off, saying that the AI could not deliver what they expected AI to deliver. But I think that should be an eye opener to those employees who were dropped. That they could drop, even though they've called them back, they've called some of them back, but they were expendable,
Oh,
right? So you see, it is a matter of survival for you to learn new skills, right? And then if you have a predictable job that pays you very well, what it means is that you have a resource, you have financial assets from there that could be deployed into other ventures. And people keep talking about letting your money work for you. If you have a job that pays you extremely well, diversification. We remember I talked about institutions that have one leader, one point of one source. Any country that has only one single income source is a country that is vulnerable to financial collapse. Um, Take Nigerian oil, for instance. We know that the world, one of the reasons, even the US, which is fighting back and forth about, I think Donald Trump's current position is he's pro fossil fuels, whereas much of the world is moving away from fossil fuels. And I give the example of Samsung, for instance. Samsung has been a construction company. And then Samsung has built cars and it has continued to move. Unilever has continued to evolve across many things. And I give the example of Dangote as well. Dangote does so many things. There's diversification, right? I think it's a matter of survival and for your own safety. Um, if you don't have that buffer, whenever there is a problem, you and then your entire family are in, except you're in a different lifetime. The lifetime has changed. Like what was obtainable 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it's not obtainable now. Things have changed so fast. And that's why I give the example of skill stacking. Your entire focus could be on coding as an IT person, but you could learn graphics on the side and learn this and learn that and then combine them together, giving you competitive advantage over everyone else. So I would say, yes, it's not even a hidden vulnerability, it's an obvious vulnerability. You are vulnerable. You I say to people, I'm prepared to drive a cab if I need to, if ever things go bad. That's sort of my mindset. Like I'm prepared to drive a truck. I'm like that's sort of my mindset because I actually know that you really cannot predict what's going to happen. Like you, especially when someone else is the decision maker in your life. So
hmm.
that's what I would say.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you so much, Dr. Dara, for this wonderful presentation. And it's something that I believe that we actually need now. And it's not the fact that whether you're just a young professional, you're just starting out, even those that have been in this business for a while, it is something that we all need because we keep learning. We have to learn. The day you stop learning, they say that day you stop living. So you need to continue to acquire more knowledge to help you navigate through these current times. And the changes we are even experiencing now is way um, different from what it is anybody has, even what history has told us. The changes are just too enormous. So thank you so much for this. If you missed any part or you want to rewatch this wonderful presentation, please head to our YouTube channel at _value loop to get this and previous sessions too if you have if it's the first time you're joining us. With this, I say thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful rest of the day. See you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dara.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank